Johnson awaiting for the announcement of His Majesty the King. He's just the second British monarch ever to address Congress. His mother, Queen Elizabeth II, did so in 1991. The King is expected to focus on the shared democratic values between the U.S. and the U.K., reaffirming the importance of the so-called special relationship. Despite recent disagreements, President Trump is not in attendance this afternoon, though he welcomed the King to the White House in a formal ceremony yesterday and, of course, again this morning. We also expect the King to address Saturday's shooting at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. NBC News Chief Capitol Hill correspondent Ryan Nobles joins us from inside the House chamber. Ryan, I'll let our viewers know that at any moment we're awaiting the House Sergeant at Arms, William McFarland, to announce the arrival of the King, and we will take that moment live. The big question on this trip was, can the King help mend the relationship between the president and the UK? There's obviously some bad blood right now because the president says the UK, as our closest ally, did not essentially get the US's back in its war with Iran that is still ongoing, I should say. And the second part of all of this, the Epstein part of this, Ryan, and of course we know what happened with King Charles's brother, Andrew, and the Epstein victims that have demanded justice from him and from others. Andrew, of course, stripped from all of his royal ties. But it is unclear if he's going to address Epstein here. It most likely he will not. Correct, Ryan?
Yeah, we're not expecting that today, Tom. In fact, the King has gone out of his way not to address that subject at all, at least publicly, during his visit here to the United States. And so we do not expect it to come up during this speech here in the next couple of minutes. But what we do expect is for a bit of a charm offensive. And that's generally what the King's responsibility is when he makes trips like this to foreign countries, particularly here to the United States, to reaffirm the shared values between the United States and the United Kingdom. And we've already seen him doing that. He was here earlier in the day, held a joint meeting with the Republican and Democratic leadership from both the House and Senate. And in this speech here today, he's expected to especially hone in on the long-term relationship that the two countries have had, the shared values, and the future that he hopes the two countries can forge together going forward. There's a couple of things to look for over the course of this speech, Tom, that will be a bit different than a State of the Union, which is normally the type of big speech that we're accustomed to seeing in this chamber. Yes, both members of the House and Senate will be in the room for this speech, but different from a presidential address will be that the King's spouse, Queen Camilla, is expected to join him as he processes through the chamber, and she will actually be seated on the dais, different than what we've seen with State of the Unions, where the presidential spouse, the First Lady, would be sitting in the gallery and would watch the speech from up above. There's also some question as to whether or not what type of greeting King Charles will receive as he walks down into the chamber. When his mother, Queen Elizabeth, addressed this body back in 1991, she walked down the middle of the aisle and no one shook her hand. It was thought not to be appropriate, that was breaking with protocol. Now, we see King Charles willing to shake people's hands in other settings. Will the members of Congress take the opportunity to try and attempt to shake his hand as he enters the chamber here in the next few minutes? That's an open question. And then one other thing I think will be important to watch here today is that this room, particularly for big speeches like this, Tom, has been an incredibly divisive place. Going back through basically the beginning of the Trump administration, it carried through the Biden administration, and now through the second Trump administration. When the president has addressed this body, it is very polarized. Half of the chamber sits with their hands glued to their seats. They do not stand. They rarely clap throughout the entire speech, while the other side of the chamber is on their feet applauding at almost every single line the president delivers. It will likely be a much different setting here. We have not really seen a unified chamber in this sense, perhaps going back to when the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky addressed this body towards the beginning of the war with Russia, where at that point he had unified support amongst Republicans and Democrats from American support in that war effort. We do expect there to be a very warm reception for King Charles despite those disagreements that you talked about at the top of this broadcast. These members of Congress, both Republican and Democrat, understand how important that relationship is, how important that relationship is both economically and from a national security perspective. And we do expect them to greet King Charles warmly, and that they will respond pretty affirmatively to most of the things that he has to say in this speech. And we expect him to be very subtle. King Charles has a very different political style than Donald Trump. The remarks that he has, you're going to have to, in some ways, read between the lines to see the point that he's trying to make, Tom.
Yeah, Ron, I will say, just from judging from the camera shots that we're seeing in the different angles we just heard, we're going to pause for a moment. Let's listen in.
III and Queen Camilla.
We just heard the House Sergeant at Arms there, William McFarland, announcing the arrival, and we see him there, of His Majesty King Charles III, his wife, of course, Her Majesty Queen Camilla, just behind him, as King Charles makes his way, walking a little bit fast, down the middle of the House chamber there, and about to address both the Senate and the House that have gathered for him. The Vice President there shaking his hand, the Speaker, Mike Johnson, as well. We expect these remarks to be around 10 minutes, maybe a little bit longer than that. We're going to take these remarks in their entirety. Again, this is only the second time that a monarch has addressed the House chamber in this way. His daughter, I should say his mother, the only other monarch to do this. The king receiving a very jovial and very energetic response, again, from both Republicans and Democrats there in the House chamber. The king looking to take it all in here as before he begins his remarks. And again, we're expecting the king to talk about the strength of the bonds between the U.S. and the U.K. and in some ways hoping to restore those bonds. Let's listen in.
Members of Congress, I have the high privilege and distinct honor of presenting to you His Majesty Charles III.
Mr. Vice President, Mr. Speaker, members of Congress, representatives of the American people across all states, territories, cities, and communities. I would like, if I may, to take this opportunity to express my particular gratitude to you all for the great honor of addressing this joint meeting of Congress, and on behalf of the Queen and myself, to thank the American people for welcoming us to the United States to mark this semi-quincentennial year of the Declaration of Independence. And for all of that time, And for all of that time, our destinies as nations have been interlinked. As Oscar Wilde said, we have really everything in common with America nowadays, except, of course, language. So, ladies and gentlemen, we meet in times of great uncertainty, in times of conflict from Europe to the Middle East, which pose immense challenges for the international community and whose impact is felt in communities the length and breadth of our own countries. We meet, too, in the aftermath of the incident not far from this great building that sought to harm the leadership of your nation and to foment wider fear and discord. Let me say with unshakable resolve, such acts of violence will never succeed. Whatever our differences, whatever disagreements we may have, we stand united in our commitment to uphold democracy, to protect all our people from harm, and to salute the courage of those who daily risk their lives in the service of our countries. Standing here today, it is hard not to feel the weight of history on my shoulder, because the modern relationship between our two nations and our own peoples spans not merely 250 years, but over 4 centuries. It is extraordinary to think that I am the 19th in our line of sovereigns to study with daily attention the affairs of America. So I come here today with the highest respect for the United States Congress, this citadel of democracy created to represent the voice of all American people to advance sacred rights and freedoms. Speaking in this renowned chamber of debate and deliberation, I cannot help but think of my late mother, Queen Elizabeth, who in 1991 was also afforded this signal honor and similarly spoke under the watchful eye of the Statue of Freedom above us. Today, I am here on this great occasion in the life of our nations to express the highest regard and friendship of the British people to the people of the United States. Now, as you may know, when I address my own Parliament at Westminster, we still follow an age-old tradition and take a Member of Parliament hostage, holding him or her at Buckingham Palace until I am safely returned. These days, we look after our guests rather well, to the point that they often do not want to leave. I don't know, Mr. Speaker, if there were any volunteers for that role here today. As I look back across the centuries, Mr. Speaker, there emerge certain patterns, certain self-evident truths from which we can learn and draw mutual strength. With the spirit of 1776 in our minds, we can perhaps agree that we do not always agree, at least in the first instance. Indeed, the very principle on which your Congress was founded, no taxation without representation, was at once a fundamental disagreement between us, and at the same time a shared democratic value which you inherited from us. Ours is a partnership born out of dispute, but no less strong for it. So perhaps in this example, we can discern that our nations are in fact instinctively like-minded, a product of the common democratic, legal, and social traditions in which our governance is rooted to this day. Drawing on these values and traditions, time and again, our two countries have always found ways to come together. And by Jove, Mr. Speaker, when we have found that way to agree, what great change is brought about, not just for the benefit of our peoples, but of all peoples. This, I believe, is the special ingredient in our relationship. As President Trump himself observed during his state visit to Britain last autumn, the bond of kinship and identity between America and the United Kingdom is priceless and eternal. It is irreplaceable and unbreakable. Mr. Speaker, this is by no means my first visit to Washington, D.C., the capital of this great republic. It is, in fact, my 20th visit to the United States and my first as King and head of the Commonwealth. This is a city which symbolizes a period in our shared history, or what Charles Dickens might have called a tale of two Georges. First President, George Washington, and my 5 times great-grandfather, King George III. King George, as you know, never set foot in America, and please rest assured, ladies and gentlemen, I am not here as part of some cunning rearguard action. The Founding Fathers were bold and imaginative rebels with a cause. 250 years ago, or as we say in the United Kingdom, just the other day, they declared independence. By balancing contending forces and drawing strength into diversity, they united 13 disparate colonies to forge a nation on the revolutionary idea of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. They carried with them and carried forward the great inheritance of the British Enlightenment, as well as the ideals which had an even deeper history in English common law and Magna Carta. These roots run deep, and they are still vital. Our Declaration of Rights of 1689 was not only the foundation of our constitutional monarchy, but also provided the source of so many of the principles reiterated, often verbatim, in the American Bill of Rights of 1791. And those roots go even further back in history. The US Supreme Court Historical Society has calculated that Magna Carta is cited in at least 160 Supreme Court cases since 1789, not least as the foundation of the principle that executive power is subject to checks and balances. This is the reason why there stands a stone by the River Thames at This stone records that an acre of that ancient and historic site was given to the United States of America by the people of the United Kingdom to symbolize our shared resolve in support of liberty and in memory of President John F. Kennedy. Distinguished members of the 119th Congress, it is here in these very halls that this spirit of liberty and the promise of America's founders is present in every session and every vote cast, not by the will of one, but by the deliberation of many, representing the living mosaic of the United States. In both of our countries, it is the very fact of our vibrant, diverse, and free societies that gives us our collective strength, including to support victims of some of the ills that so tragically exist in both our societies today. And, Mr. Speaker, for many here, and for myself, the Christian faith is a firm anchor and daily inspiration that guides us, not only personally, but together as members of our community. Having devoted a large part of my life to interfaith relationships and greater understanding, it is that faith in the triumph of light over darkness which I have found confirmed countless times. Through it, I am inspired by the profound respect that develops as people of different faiths grow in their understanding of each other. It is why, it is my hope, my prayer, that in these turbulent times, working together and with our international partners, we can stem the beating of plowshares into swords. I am mindful that we are still in the season of Easter, the season that most strengthens my hope. It is why I believe with all my heart that the essence of our two nations is a generosity of spirit and a duty to foster compassion, to promote peace, to deepen mutual understanding, and to value all people of all faiths and of none. The alliance that our two nations have built over the centuries, and for which we are profoundly grateful to the American people, is truly unique. And that alliance is part of what Henry Kissinger described as Kennedy's soaring vision of an Atlantic partnership based on twin pillars, Europe and America. That partnership, I believe, Mr. Speaker, is more important today than it has ever been. The first reigning British sovereign to set foot in America was my grandfather, King George VI. He visited in 1939 with my beloved grandmother, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. The forces of fascism in Europe were on the march, and sometime before the United States had joined us in the defense of freedom, our shared values prevailed. Today, we find ourselves in a new era, but those values remain. It is an era that is in many ways more volatile and more dangerous than the world to which my late mother spoke in this chamber in 1991. The challenges we face are too great for any one nation to bear alone. But in this unpredictable environment, our alliance cannot rest on past achievements or assume that foundational principles simply endure. As my Prime Minister said last month, ours is an indispensable partnership. We must not disregard everything that has sustained us for the last 80 years. Instead, we must build on it. Renewal today starts with security. The United Kingdom recognizes that the threats we face demand a transformation in British defence. That is why our country, in order to be fit for the future, has committed to the biggest sustained increase in defence spending since the Cold War, during part of which, over 50 years ago, I served with immense pride in the Royal Navy, following in the naval footsteps of my father, Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, my grandfather, King George VI, my great-uncle, Lord Mountbatten, and my great-grandfather, King George V. This year, of course, also marks the 25th anniversary of 9/11. This atrocity was a defining moment for America, and your pain and shock were felt around the whole world. During my visit to New York, my wife and I will again pay our respects to the victims, the families, and the bravery shown in the face of terrible loss. We stood with you then, and we stand with you now in solemn remembrance of a day that shall never be forgotten. In the immediate aftermath of 9/11, when NATO invoked Article 5 for the first time, and the United Nations Security Council was united in the face of terror, we answered the call together, as our people have done so for more than a century, shoulder to shoulder through 2 world wars, the Cold War, Afghanistan, and moments that have defined our shared security. Today, Mr. Speaker, that same unyielding resolve is needed for the defense of Ukraine and her most courageous people. It is needed in order to secure a truly just and lasting peace. From the depths of the Atlantic to the disastrously melting ice caps of the Arctic, the commitment and expertise of the United States Armed Forces and its allies lie at the heart of NATO, pledged to each other's defense, protecting our citizens and interests, keeping North Americans and Europeans safe from our common adversaries. Our defense, intelligence, and security ties are hardwired together through relationships measured not in years, but in decades. Today, thousands of US service personnel, defense officials, and their families are stationed in the United Kingdom, as British personnel serve with equal pride across 30 American states. We are building F-35s together, and we have agreed the most ambitious submarine program in history, AUKUS. and we are doing it in partnership with Australia, a country of which I'm also immensely proud to serve as sovereign. We do not embark on these remarkable endeavors together out of sentiment. We do so because they build greater shared resilience for the future, so making our citizens safer for generations to come. Our common ideals were not only crucial for liberty and equality, they are also the foundation of our shared prosperity. The rule of law, the certainty of stable and accessible rules, an independent judiciary resolving disputes and delivering impartial justice. These features created the conditions for centuries of unmatched economic growth in our two countries. This is why our governments are concluding new economic and technology agreements to write the next chapter of our joint prosperity and ensure that British and American ingenuity continues to lead the world. Our nations are combining talent and resources in the technologies of tomorrow. Our new partnerships in nuclear fusion and quantum computing and in AI and drug discovery, holding the promise of saving countless lives. More broadly, we celebrate the $430 billion in annual trade that continues to grow, the $1.7 trillion in mutual investment that fuels that innovation, and the millions of jobs on both sides of the Atlantic, supported across both economies. These are strong foundations on which to continue to build for generations yet unborn. Our ties in education, research, and cultural exchange empower citizens and future leaders of both countries. The Marshall Scholarship, named after the great General George Marshall, and the association of which I am so proud to be patron, are emblematic of the connection between our two countries. Since its founding, more than 2,300 scholarships have been awarded, opening doors for Americans from all walks of life to study at the United Kingdom's leading universities. So as we look toward the next 250 years, we must also reflect on our shared responsibility to safeguard nature, our most precious and irreplaceable asset. Millennia before our nations existed, before any border drawn, the mountains of Scotland and Appalachia were one, a single continuous range forged in the ancient collision of continents. The natural wonders of the United States of America are indeed a unique asset, and generations of Americans have risen to this calling. Indigenous, political, and civic leaders, people in rural communities and cities alike, have all helped to protect and nurture what President Theodore Roosevelt called the glorious heritage of this land's extraordinary natural splendor, on which so much of its prosperity has always depended. Yet, even as we celebrate the beauty that surrounds us, our generation must decide how to address the collapse of critical natural systems, which threatens far more than the harmony and essential diversity of nature. We ignore at our peril the fact that these natural systems, in other words, nature's own economy, provide the foundation for our prosperity and our national security. The story of the United Kingdom and the United States is at its heart a story of reconciliation, renewal, and remarkable partnership. From the bitter divisions of 250 years ago, we forged a friendship that has grown into one of the most consequential alliances in human history. I pray with all my heart that our alliance will continue to defend our shared values with our partners in Europe and the Commonwealth and across the world. And that we ignore the clarion calls to become ever more inward-looking. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Vice President, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, America's words carry weight and meaning, as they have since independence. The actions of this great nation matter even more. President Lincoln understood this so well with his reflection in the magisterial Gettysburg Address, that the world may little note what we say, but will never forget what we do. And so to the United States of America, on your 250th birthday, let our two countries rededicate ourselves to each other in the selfless service of our peoples and of all the peoples of the world. God bless the United States, and God bless the United Kingdom.
We have just been listening to King Charles address both chambers of Congress here. And as the first rule of public speaking, know your audience, King Charles did his homework. He was eloquent, he was funny, he was thoughtful, and he was incredibly respectful, starting his comments by saying, the United States Congress, the citadel of democracy, created to represent the voices of all American people to advance sacred rights and freedoms. And then later getting a standing ovation when he said the bond of kinship between the U.S. and the U.K. is priceless and eternal, is irreplaceable and unbreakable. There were several moments of standing ovations here throughout his speech. The King trying to reaffirm those strong bonds between his country, the UK, and of course, the United States as well. And as I bring in Ryan Nobles here, who listened to the speech as well there on Capitol Hill, I wonder, Ryan, if he was sending a subtle message, and maybe not so subtle message, to our president, when he said America's words carry weight and meaning, and they have since the independence. The actions of this great nation matter even more.
I don't see how you could not interpret it as such, Tom, and I have to say, being in the room, and it may not have been picked up if you were watching at home on television, when he said those two lines, there was a hush, almost gasp, you would describe, from the Democratic side of the chamber in that moment. That clearly resonated with certain members of Congress in the room. And then when he drove that point home by referencing President Lincoln and the Gettysburg Address, saying that the world may little know what we say, but will never forget what we do. That was as powerful a moment, I think, as anything that he gave over the course of that roughly 25-minute speech. And there were multiple opportunities for him to use his subtle nature to drive home a point. Right before that section that you had brought up, Tom, he talked all about how the United Kingdom and the United States need to reinforce their alliance, and that they will continue to defend our shared values with partners in Europe and the Commonwealth across the world, and that they ignore the clarion calls to become ever more inward-looking, which, of course, has been a degree of criticism for the Trump administration at different points. The other thing I think is a very interesting thing to point out, which you may not realize if you were watching at home, I had the prepared remarks in front of me, that the King did not at any point stray even a syllable away from the remarks that he had prepared to deliver here in this chamber. A very much a different approach than what we see from Donald Trump or even any other president. Bill Clinton was known to stray from his script from time to time to drive home a point. Even when he was interrupted by applause or laughter, Tom, he would go immediately right back to where he was in his prepared remarks. Just kind of an indication of the type of public speaker he is and the type of public figure he is, that he had a very specific plan in mind, a very specific message that he wanted to send, and he did not deviate from that goal even a little bit over the course of this speech, Tom.
He showed no sign of nervousness, and when he concluded the speech, Ryan, both Republicans and Democrats were reaching across the aisle, quite literally, to shake his hand, to shake the Queen's hand as well. The speech there in the chambers, and this is somewhat rare, I know you alluded to this a little bit, but that both parties received this speech so well, it is clear there was something for everyone in this speech. But, you know, at times, especially when speeches are given in the House chamber, many times in the Trump era, they are speeches for an audience of one. And with that, I do want to bring in NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba. That audience of one, of course, being President Trump. This is very early. The speech just wrapped up, you know, a minute or 2 minutes ago, Monica. Do we know, or how do you think, you cover the president every day, he's going to receive this speech?
Well, Tom, the president himself said that he wished he could have traveled to Capitol Hill to be in attendance for these remarks. Ultimately, he could not do that for logistical and security reasons, and because he wouldn't be in attendance for a speech like this. But that is how much he wanted to be a part of it. He was looking forward to what the king was going to say. And certainly some of the things that the king talked about, the president might disagree with him on. When the president specifically has made these comments about NATO in the past, he has been a very big critic of that critical alliance. It was clear here from the king's speech that he wanted to boost NATO and talk about how important it is to be able to have a system of allies when it comes to important things like the war in Ukraine currently, which is another area of a little bit of disagreement about how much support is still going there in terms of how the U.S. views that and how the UK views that. And I thought something else, Tom, that really stood out to me was what the king said in reference to what happened on Saturday night at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, which is that any acts of violence that are intended to make people feel scared or back down from their daily lives, he says those will not be successful, that those kind of intended acts are never going to be successful. And that was one of the moments that received some of the greatest applause in the chamber.
Monica, we thank you for that. I do want to go to Gabe Gutierrez as well, because there's another big story we're following. The former director of the FBI, James Comey, has been indicted once again. Gabe Gutierrez, Gabe, talk to us about what we know about this case, the legal merits, and what exactly got him under the auspice of the FBI once again.
Well, Tom, we're still waiting for several details from the Department of Justice about the charges, the exact charges against him. But this all is related to this Instagram post back in May of 2025 that James Comey put on his account. That's according to two sources familiar with the matter. In that Instagram post, he posted a picture of seashells. You see it right there. The number is 8647. 47 referring to the President of the United States, Donald Trump, 47th President. 86, that is up for interpretation. Supporters of the president have interpreted that as a threat. 86 referring to potentially kill the president. For his part, James Comey says that he did not intend that. He took the photo down, and that number 86 has been used in a number of other contexts. For example, in restaurants, when an item is sold out, it can be interpreted to get rid of. So that is apparently what this case boils down to. Again, we're still waiting for more details from the DOJ, but this all comes, Tom, after this is the second time that Comey has been indicted. The DOJ indicting him over allegedly lying to Congress back in 2020. That case was dismissed because a judge ruled that the U.S. attorney who signed off on that indictment was unlawfully appointed. So far, we've not had any comment from James Comey on this latest indictment. But again, we're just learning that just a short time ago, according to two sources, that the federal grand jury in North Carolina, which is where Comey has his beach house, has returned an indictment against the former FBI director, Tom.
All right, Gabe, we thank you for that. That's going to conclude this NBC News special report. We're going to have much more ahead on NBC News Daily and on our streaming network, NBC News Now, online at NBCNews.com always. I'll have a full wrap-up tonight on Nightly News. I'm Tom Yamas reporting from New York tonight. We thank you for watching.